It also revealed how warning signs, when dismissed as temporary anger or youthful impulsiveness, can quietly gather strength beneath the surface. Friends remembered moments that once seemed insignificant, harsh words, controlling behavior, an inability to accept distance, but in hindsight, each detail felt like a missed opportunity to intervene. The tragedy became not only a story of one life lost and another destroyed, but a lesson about the cost of silence and denial. For many observers, the case underscored the fragile boundary between emotion and accountability. Love, when stripped of respect and empathy, can distort into possession, and possession, when threatened, may seek control in its most destructive form. The courtroom proceedings closed a legal chapter, yet the emotional questions lingered far beyond the verdict. Communities were left asking how compassion, awareness, and timely support might prevent such darkness from taking root again. Instead, they focused on the life she lived and the light she carried into the everyday moments others might overlook. Small acts of generosity, staying late to comfort a frightened child, offering words of reassurance to worried parents, or simply listening with genuine care, became the stories repeated most often. Through these memories, her presence felt less like something lost and more like something entrusted to those who remained. Community members began to reflect on how one person's quiet compassion can ripple outward in ways that cannot be measured. Scholarships, volunteer efforts, and simple promises to show more patience in daily life emerged as living tributes, each one carrying forward a fragment of what she had given so freely. Grief did not disappear, but it slowly reshaped itself into purpose. In time, her name came to represent more than tragedy. It stood for gentleness in a hurried world, for service without applause, and for the enduring belief that kindness, however small, can leave a mark far stronger than harm. Parents who brought their children to the clinic often spoke in hushed, grateful tones, aware that the care their families received carried a deeper meaning now. Each appointment became more than a routine visit. It was a quiet promise that kindness would continue to guide the work done within those walls. In shared moments of patience and reassurance, the staff found a way to transform sorrow into service. Beyond the clinic, conversations about emotional well-being, healthy relationships, and early intervention began to surface more openly in the community. What had once been difficult to discuss was now approached with honesty and urgency, as people recognized the importance of listening closely, to fear, to pain, and to the silent signals that someone may be struggling. Awareness, though born from tragedy, offered a path toward prevention and care. And so the story did not end with a verdict or a headline. It carried forward in quieter ways. In children who grew up remembering gentle hands and encouraging words, in families who felt seen during vulnerable moments, and in a community learning, slowly but sincerely, how to protect both tenderness and life itself. At first, progress came in fragile steps, days measured not by milestones, but by the simple ability to move forward without being overwhelmed by memory. Support from family, friends, and counselors formed a quiet foundation beneath him, reminding him that healing does not mean forgetting, but learning how to carry loss without being defined by it. Over time, routines returned, and with them, small moments of steadiness that once felt impossible. Those who walked beside him understood that recovery from betrayal and grief unfolds unevenly. Some days brought clarity and strength. Others reopened questions with no easy answers. Yet within that uncertainty, there remained a gradual rediscovery of purpose, an understanding that survival itself can become an act of resilience. By choosing to keep going, even when the path felt uncertain, he honored both his own future and the memory of what had been lost. His journey became a quiet testament to endurance, proof that while tragedy can fracture a life, it does not have to determine its ending. And in time, hope, subtle at first, then steady, began to find its way back in. These discussions encouraged schools, workplaces, and community groups to look more closely at how boundaries are taught and respected in an age where technology can blur the line between connection and control. Behaviors once dismissed as jealousy or persistent affection began to be re-examined through the lens of safety and consent. The realization that digital access can amplify emotional instability prompted renewed calls for education around privacy, accountability, and healthy communication. Advocates emphasized that prevention often begins with listening, taking expressions of fear seriously, documenting troubling conduct, and seeking support before situations escalate. Legal systems, too, faced renewed scrutiny regarding how effectively they respond to early signs of stalking or harassment, and whether protective measures are accessible enough to intervene in time. While no single reform can erase the pain of what happened, the hope remains that awareness can interrupt similar paths before they reach a point of no return. In this way, the tragedy became part of a larger, ongoing effort to better understand the intersections of emotion, technology, and responsibility. Though born from loss, the conversations it inspired continue to shape how communities recognize danger, protect vulnerability, and uphold the dignity of every life. For investigators, the case became a reminder that patience and precision often matter more than speed. Each fragment of evidence, no matter how ordinary it first appeared, gained meaning when placed beside another, forming a clearer picture of intent and sequence. The slow assembly of truth required not only technical skill, but persistence, collaboration, and a commitment to follow facts wherever they led. In training rooms and briefings, the story was later shared to illustrate how modern investigations rely on both human awareness and digital footprints. Surveillance systems, communication records, and attentive witnesses together created a narrative stronger than any single piece of proof. The lesson was not only about solving crime, but about the quiet diligence required to uphold accountability in complex situations. For the broader public, the outcome carried a different kind of reassurance, that even when wrongdoing is hidden behind planning and deception, truth can still surface through careful work and collective effort. While justice cannot restore what was lost, it affirms a shared belief that lives matter, memories endure, and responsibility cannot remain concealed forever. In the quiet glow of candlelight, grief seemed to soften into something shared rather than borne alone. People who arrived as strangers left with a subtle sense of connection, reminded that empathy can emerge even in the shadow of sorrow. The silence between prayers carried its own language, one of remembrance, solidarity, and a collective wish that such loss might one day become rarer. Faith leaders, neighbors, and volunteers spoke gently about choosing care over bitterness, urging communities to recognize pain before it hardens into harm. Their words did not erase the tragedy, but they offered a path forward shaped by awareness, compassion, and responsibility toward one another. In these gatherings, mourning slowly intertwined with resolve. Long after the candles dimmed, the meaning of those nights endured. They became symbols of a community's promise, to remember a life defined by kindness, to protect the vulnerable with greater vigilance, and to believe that even in the presence of profound loss, humanity can still choose tenderness over despair. Students who receive support in her name often learn her story alongside the opportunity they've been given. For many, that knowledge carries a quiet responsibility, to pursue their education with compassion, to serve others with patience, and to recognize how one life, though brief, can influence countless paths forward. In this way, remembrance becomes something active rather than distant. Volunteers who participate in outreach programs speak of feeling connected to a purpose larger than themselves. Treating a child's pain, offering reassurance to anxious families, or simply showing up where help is needed transforms memory into motion. What began as mourning gradually reshapes into continuity, ensuring that care does not end where a life once did. And so the legacy endures not in sorrow alone, but in kindness repeated across time. Each act of service, each future made possible, becomes another quiet chapter in a story that refuses to close, one that reminds the world how compassion can outlive even the deepest loss. It asks the listener not simply to understand what happened, but to consider why remembrance matters more than spectacle. When attention shifts from the violence to the lives touched by it, the narrative becomes less about fear and more about responsibility. How we care for one another, how we recognize suffering, and how we choose compassion in ordinary moments. In that sense, stories like Kendra's become quiet invitations. They encourage conversations about safety, emotional health, and the courage to intervene when something feels wrong. They remind us that empathy is not passive. It is a daily practice shaped through listening, patience, and the willingness to protect dignity wherever it is threatened. And perhaps the most enduring truth is this: while tragedy can command headlines for a moment, it is kindness that writes the longer story. In choosing to remember with compassion rather than curiosity alone, communities ensure that a life defined by care continues to inspire care in return. It also raises difficult moral questions about accountability and redemption. While the legal stand in that quiet space between grief and forgiveness, communities are tested not by the depth of their wounds, but by their willingness to rebuild together. Memory becomes both a burden and a guide, reminding us of what was lost, while urging us toward what might still be restored. True redemption, if it exists at all, is not found in forgetting the past, but in transforming its pain into a deeper commitment to dignity, empathy, and justice for every life that follows. Delivered sentences. Emotional justice is far more complex. No punishment can truly balance a life taken. What remains instead is the responsibility of the living, to choose compassion over resentment and healing over hatred. And within that understanding lies a quiet kind of hope. Not the hope that tragedy can be undone, but the belief that its lessons can still guide the living toward gentler choices. When remembrance inspires vigilance shaped by compassion rather than fear, it transforms sorrow into something that protects rather than paralyzes. Communities that carry these memories forward often become more attentive to one another's struggles, more willing to ask difficult questions, to offer help without waiting to be asked, and to treat emotional pain with the same urgency as physical danger. In these small, daily decisions, prevention stops being an abstract ideal and becomes a shared practice woven into ordinary life. Over time, the story settles into something quieter than headlines yet stronger than silence. It endures as a reminder that every act of care, every moment of listening, and every choice to intervene with kindness has the power to change an ending. And in that steady collective effort, the meaning of loss is reshaped into a commitment to protect the lives still unfolding. And in that quiet weaving of memory into daily life, remembrance becomes less about looking backward and more about guiding what comes next. The gentleness she showed in ordinary moments turns into a kind of compass, subtle, steady, and available to anyone willing to follow it. Through this, loss is not erased, but it is given direction, shaping choices that lean toward care rather than indifference. Those who carry her story forward often find that legacy is lived in small, consistent ways. In listening a little longer, forgiving a little sooner, helping where help is needed without expectation of praise. These gestures rarely draw attention, yet they accumulate into something enduring, echoing the quiet kindness that first inspired them. So the story does not end in silence. It continues in softened voices, in patient hands, and in communities choosing, again and again, to value compassion over cruelty. And in that continuation, a life once threatened by violence is remembered instead for the tenderness that still moves through the world because she was here. And when that light is carried forward by many hands, it begins to feel less fragile and more enduring. What once seemed like a single life's kindness becomes a shared inheritance, passed quietly from person to person through compassion, patience, and care. In this way, memory is not confined to the past. It becomes something living, shaping the tone of everyday encounters and the choices people make when faced with another's pain. Such remembrance asks for no grand gestures. It lives in ordinary courage, the decision to listen without judgment, to protect without hesitation, to love without the need for recognition. These simple acts, repeated across time, form a gentle answer to violence, a reminder that humanity is measured not by moments of harm, but by the persistence of goodness that follows. And so the story settles into something steady and luminous, not defined by the darkness that interrupted it, but by the compassion that continues to grow in its wake. In carrying that compassion forward, the living ensure that loss is met not only with grief, but with a promise that tenderness will remain, and that the light she offered will keep finding new places to shine. Those who carry such memory forward often discover that kindness, practiced deliberately, can reshape even the heaviest grief. It does not erase absence, but it gives absence meaning, turning loss into a reason to protect, to comfort, and to stand closer to one another in times of need. In this way, empathy becomes more than emotion. It becomes action woven into daily life. And so the story rests not in its ending, but in its continuation through the living. Each gentle decision, each moment of listening, each act of quiet love becomes another line written in a legacy that endures. What was taken cannot be returned, yet what was given, care, faith, tenderness, continues to move outward, reminding the world that even after profound loss, humanity still holds the power to choose light. Such endurance reveals something simple yet profound. A life measured in compassion does not end when breath does. It continues in every kindness inspired by its memory, in every moment someone chooses care over indifference, in every act of protection offered without recognition. Through these living reflections, what was once fragile becomes lasting. And so the story closes not with silence, but with continuation. A reminder that love, once given freely, leaves traces the world cannot erase. In those traces, quiet, persistent, and luminous, the final meaning remains, that even in the presence of loss, compassion still speaks, and hope still answers.